Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. As you can see from some of the art behind us, if you're checking us out on YouTube, there's been a lot of news that's come out in the last couple of weeks about big events, big things coming from DC. So, Rocky's had some family stuff going on. We haven't had a chance to get together and podcast. So, we still should have the regular DC Spotlight coming up tomorrow on Tuesday, but we thought we'd drop an episode for you on Monday as well, just to bring you up to speed with what we have going on and talk a little bit about the state of DC, because there's big news that has come out recently. So we've got Death of the Justice League that Rocky has up there. I think we mentioned it on the last DC Spotlight, the Flashpoint Beyond that's coming up. We talked to Jeremy Adams, who's one of the writers of that recently, an interview that'll be up later this week. There's some books coming out that tie into the CW TV shows. There's a Flash movie that got announced for the DC animated universe. So there's a lot of stuff going on, which in a way is good, but I sort of have mixed feelings right now about DC. There's things that I don't like, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but I'll throw it over to Rocky. What are your thoughts about all this recent DC news, Rock?
Well, it's interesting because I do think that there's a lot to be hopeful for, but at the same time, I think that followers or listeners to your podcast and followers of my YouTube channel, there's a sense that continuity in the DC universe is a little wonky. So it's funny because there's so many, reading every DC comic that comes out, you and I get a sense of how things are interconnected, but there's a sense of uneasiness and wonkiness about it. And it's not always clear to me that editorial, current DC editorial, is that the left hand, it always seems to be, I don't know if they're really aware of what the right hand is doing. And it feels a little bit disjointed, and it's one of those things, and I've used the analogy with you before. It's like, it's sort of like walking through a forest, and if you're not careful, you'll see a couple trees that are on fire. But if you look at the whole thing, the forest looks okay. It's kind of intact. But in different pieces of it, it definitely, there's a lot of areas of concern, and one of the areas of concerns that and will be one of the things I wanted to bring up here is sales, and I want to start off with that if I can, Jace. I just want to start off with that first because I just want to show people on the, I just wanted to, the concern that I have, and I just want to, for people in the podcast, now, Jason and I don't often, you and I don't talk a lot about specific sales numbers because since March of 2020, the data has, from Comic-Con, John Jackson Miller Comic-Con has been a little wonky, because DC is no longer with Diamond. But I just want to say that in September of 2021, there was only 5 DC comics that sold above 50,000. That was Batman issue 115, Joker issue 7, Nice House on the Lake, Batman and Catwoman number 7, I Am Batman number 2, and Deathstroke Incorporated number 1. That was in September of 2021, and those are the only ones that sold above 50,000. And there was a whole slew of DC comics, the core DC line that sells under 31,000. Is Flash, Wonder Woman, Titans United, Green Lantern, Swamp Thing, Suicide Squad, Harley Quinn, Black Manta, Superman and the Authority, Action Comics, Future State Gotham, Blue and Gold, Batman v Bigby, Batman Superman, Superman 78, Aquaman the Becoming, Justice League Last Ride, Shazam, Checkmate, Wonder Woman, Black and Gold, Crush and Lobo, Icon and Rocket, and Pennyworth, all under 31,000, and Pennyworth was selling at 11,000 up to 31,000. I wanted to quickly mention those things, and because a lot of this is the area of concern, and in some circles, people are really worried because they used to be the core, that middle core DC line was in the 40,000 up range, and now it's slow to creeping down, and the top 50 is increasingly filled with Marvel and more independent comics. And the fear is, Jace, you and I are very optimistic about DC. But I don't, my fear is a lot of people aren't like you and I, where we see, we look at it and we choose the glass is half full as opposed to half empty. And I'm concerned about it. And and we'll get in, and I'm hoping that these events that we're going to be talking about, the Flashpoint Beyond, the Death of the Justice League, and the Flash sheet, leading into the sort of the Flash movie, the Flash prologue into the movie, and Trial of the Amazons, Aquaman, War for Earth 3. I hope these don't feel like just cheap gimmicky stunts. I don't think they are. I hope not. But these are my concerns. So sorry, Jace. I know that was a little long-winded of me, but I wanted to establish that there's some real world economics here that I'm concerned about as well, and that I'm extrapolating from the data that we do have. And I don't know, am I being a worrywart, or what do you think?
It's pretty interesting when we start talking about sales. So let's set the sales numbers aside for just a minute, and let's just talk about creative content, right? Like
Yeah,
we do the DC Spotlight every Tuesday. We read every single DC book. Well, 98% of the books, and don't read Looney Tunes or Scooby Doo or stuff like that.
yeah,
But for the most part, we read every book that comes out, and we try to be fair and critique it. We know no one's out to make a bad comic, but I would say at this point, we did the entirety of 2021. We never missed a week. I know you had to go solo once or twice. I had to go solo once or twice because life happens, but we never missed a week. Now, that being said, and as a fan of DC, more so than Marvel these days, I feel like DC's putting out too many books. There's 18 books this week. That's just too many. And what I find interesting about this is when, I was the first one to say when AT&T bought DC that DC was in trouble. It wasn't going to be a good thing to have this big corporate overlord. And we saw that play out in various ways to the point where AT&T didn't know what the hell they were doing, fired a bunch of people, and then didn't still running around like a chicken with its head cut off, still didn't know what to do, threw up their hands in the air and sold it off to Discovery. Let Discovery buy a controlling interest. Now, I know this stuff's kind of boring, but just bear with me because it has real impact, real life impact on creators' livelihoods and whatnot. So DC has sold a controlling interest to Discovery, right? So AT&T is, or did I say Disney? AT&T has sold a controlling interest of Warner Brother Media to Discovery. So that AT&T is still the majority shareholder, but they are relinquishing control. They're taking a bunch of money from Discovery and saying to Discovery, "We're AT&T. We are, I think for the last, I think it's 12 years now, 13 years, they have been voted the worst run company in the world." Like this is
yes,
not from me; it's from business people are saying this.
yeah,
Like I'm not being metaphorical here. They have been AT&T has been voted as the worst run Fortune 500 company in the world for over a decade.
yeah,
They're so big, they're not nimble. They constantly make stupid mistakes that cost money, like buying DirecTV for whatever it was, $8 billion, and then a few years later it was not even worth $1 billion. That's just pissing money away. They don't know, they're too big, and it leads to mistakes, right? So they didn't know what to do with Warner Media. Discovery is a media company. Okay, we don't know what we're doing. I mean, actually, a smart choice for once from AT&T. We don't know what we're doing. We don't know how to run a media company. Let's get an infusion of capital from Discovery and let them run it, and hopefully they can return profitability to Warner Brothers Media, and it looks good, right? Like as good as it will be, as good as uh, Warner Brother Media being profitable will be for Discovery with their interest in the company, it'll be even better for AT&T because AT&T is still the majority stockholder. So I say all that to say this: it takes a long time to get these business deals done. Discovery has made no concrete decisions or made nothing that's impacted DC Comics. DC Comics is sort of like a rudderless ship right now in terms of who's calling the shots business wise. We know Marie Javins is the editor in chief; she's making the call on a day to day basis. But who's directing her? Pamela Lyford, from my understanding, has been kind of hands off since this sale to Discovery's interest coming in. because she doesn't know what they're going to want to do. And they hired Daniel Cherry, uh, who came from Activision and the esports to hopefully increase their digital footprint. That didn't really happen. So there's all these darts that they've been throwing at the wall, but nothing has really stuck because there's constantly shifting parts. And it's just the way corporate business is sometimes. So I think they're putting out too much content. What's interesting is remember when they laid everybody off and they Jim Lee himself in that I think it was a Hollywood Reporter article talked about cutting the bottom, what do you say, bottom 10, 20, 15%, whatever it was. They're going to get rid of the low selling titles and focus on the really good stuff, right? One of the things I'll give Jim Lee a lot of credit for is the fact that even when the pandemic shut things down, he never told any of his staff pencils down. He allowed them to keep working. They got ahead. They got a lot of stuff done. I don't know if some of this lower quality stuff that's coming out is a product of that, but there's too much DC content right now, and a lot of it is average. Like they really do need to trim the line back and say, let's focus on the good stuff. But again, you want to talk about a rudderless ship. Like Marie Javin's calling the day to day, but she doesn't decide how many titles are being put out or not. That's not up to her. I don't, from my understanding, this Daniel Cherry guy never even picked up a comic. And if you haven't heard, listeners, he quit. He left. He bailed. He's going to go work for Kanye West now. So this guy that was supposed to be a big get is leaving. So I'm right there with you, Rocky. I'm worried about DC. I'm worried about DC. Like beyond the events and maybe the comics aren't as good as they could be or what have you, but they just seem to be making these really strange business decisions. And it's not that I think all this stuff that they're putting out is bad, but there's no reason that you can't bank some of this stuff and not be glutting the market, because what you're doing, you're competing with yourself, right? There's a lot of brand loyalty when it comes to Marvel and DC. So something like, the Green Arrow Aquaman Deep Target that's coming out. Why is that coming out right now? Is it an interesting story? Yeah, it's not bad. Is it blowing me away? No. Why is it coming out right now when there's so many other titles coming out? Like that, to me, that's something. Okay, it's 6 issues. It's self-contained. It doesn't seem to tie into anything. Like bank that for a little later. I don't know. I'm worried as well, right? I don't know what they're doing, because they talked about wanting to focus on the a certain threshold of titles, focus on quality over quantity. That's what Jim Lee said, and it really feels like they're doing the exact opposite of that right now. Would you agree?
Well, I don't. Yeah, well, I would agree that if they're trying to focus their main line, there it doesn't really feel focused. Continuity wise, it feels very wonky, and it actually feels, it almost kind of feels like they're doing the DC Omniverse thing where everything matters, but it it does feel very sporadic. There isn't a lot of connection between the titles. The writers, I don't think, are communicating with each other, even when apparently they're supposed to be communicating with each other. Like for Trial of the Amazons, there's not much there's not enough of a connection between Wonder Girl, between Nubia, and between you know Nubia and the Amazons and Wonder Woman. It's there, something does feel off, and I editorially, I think things do seem to be a little bit wonky, and it does seem to be a little bit off. But I I I think that there's, it's funny, I kind of know what you mean. Like I'm inclined not to agree with you, but yet I can kind of see where you're coming from, because there are so many titles. Like you said, this week 18 titles we're reviewing, and yet there is very little, there's no connection between these titles pretty much. I mean, Wonder Girl #7, Human Target, Superman and Robin, Task Force Z, Teen Titans Academy, Flash 778, Superman 78, Robin 10. None of these have any connections to each other, and yet at the same time, uh, at the same time, I suppose that might be a good thing for new readers, because you can buy each individual one of these titles and probably and get right into them without really necessarily knowing anything about any of the other comics. So I mean, I think that's a potentially it's a good thing. It's um it's a very precarious time, but you because I got to tell you, when I look at the competition, the distinguished competition, Marvel's got stuff that's all over the place too, in terms of that they're mass publishing all kinds of different titles, and they seem to be having the same types of uh I don't know, like they're I mean the continuity over at Marvel might be a little bit more tight, but um I
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, this isn't. I don't mean to say that this problem is unique to DC. And what's interesting, so I should mention everybody. There's an interview I did with Christopher Priest at the end of last week that's also out today. So I encourage you to go listen to that. Priest had a couple of really interesting things to say um, about very various various things. And one of them, he's been around for decades. This guy started in Marvel Comics like 1970, 69, something like that. He's been around, he's been an editor. He's been through the wars. And he specifically was talking about this idea of overloading the market, so to speak. And
mm,
he was they're fully aware of it. They're fully aware of it, but I'll mention specifically two of the things he said. Number one, he said he feels it's wrong, all the pressure that's being put on the comic divisions of both Marvel and DC to make money, right? He's like, these movies, based on the properties that come from these comics, make billions. We now know as of this recording that Spider-Man: No Way Home is the sixth highest grossing film of all time. So billions, right? So what these even if these comics on their best day going back decades, the money they made was a drop in the bucket compared to what these movies make. So he specifically named CB Cebulski. He's like, why is there pressure on CB to make these comics profitable? You're making your money in other places, Disney. Don't worry about the comics. Think of it as a loss leader. You're going to keep making comics because it's generating IP that has value somewhere else. Don't even worry about if the comics make money or not. I can see Disney, being able to swallow that pill a little more than AT&T for the reasons we already talked about. AT&T is vastly in the red as opposed to Disney's. Disney's got a higher valuation. So that was one of the things he mentioned. The other thing he mentioned is how much they are aware of this pressure. So do you remember, Rocky, in the which I don't know if you've read the entire Deathstroke run by Christopher Priest, but I love it. It's I think the best thing that Priest has ever done. It's fantastic. But
yeah,
you remember there was the storyline in there where he introduced the idea that Damian was maybe Slade Wilson's son.
yeah, oh yeah.
As
I
yeah,
thought that was a great.
he
I thought that was a
yeah
great.
he
Uh,
he ran that all the way up the flagpole, and he wanted it to stick. Like he wanted in the end, what he had to do editorially mandated was say no, Damian really is Bruce Wayne's son. To me, it would make more sense because Slade's kind of a dick, and we know
yeah,
Damian's a dick. It would have been, and I made the comment while Christopher and I were talking that would have opened up the avenue for like years and years worth of stories if Damian turned out to really be Slade's. Just because he's the biological father doesn't mean Bruce isn't still his father,
yeah.
you know, emotionally and that kind of thing. So yeah, so that was interesting that he wanted to do that, and Dan Didio eventually was like, "No, we have problems, or we have plans for Damien." And maybe years later with what Williamson's doing, but they just whatever. Dan had the final call, and Dan said no because Dan didn't want to do it, basically.
Yeah.
So later, Christopher Priest is at lunch with CB Cebulski and I think he said Tom Brevoort, and Christopher Priest tells this to Dan to CB and Tom Brevoort about how he would have wanted to make Damien like permanently Slade's son, and asked he's like he asked CB, he's like, well, what would you have said if I came to you with that idea? CB's like, oh, we would have milked the shit out of that, right? Is that not what Marvel does, right? You come up with a good idea, and then it would have been a year long event, and
Yeah.
yeah. So, but again, it's all pressure to make these comics profitable, and I really don't feel I agree with Christopher Priest. It's not fair anymore because the landscape has changed. The landscape of entertainment has changed. And I love the fact that comic writers and artists are paid more now, and the art is so different in a comic now than it was, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when it was smaller panels on newsprint, not as detailed, colors were washed out. It's so much different now. You almost can't compare them. But to force these comics to be profitable with all this competition and this kind of binge attitude that people have, I think it's destructive, And the other thing, and I'll let you comment on it. The other thing that Priest was talking about was the fact that now that these IPs are worth so much, and we've talked about it a bunch of times, the creators don't have as much freedom to do what they want to do because there's the corporate overlords looking down, like, well, you can't damage this property, then we can't put it on TV, or we can't do this or do that, or constantly. At one point, Christopher said, "Yeah, I wanted to do this one thing, and Marvel had to run it by standards and practices, and they shot it down or whatever." And I'm like, Christopher, think about what you just said. You're writing a comic, and the script has to be run by standards and practices. Think about when you first broke into comics, how ludicrous that idea would be, right? It's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah, no, it is. But that's the nature of comics. But at the same time, that's the nature of continuity, and I guess that's the challenge of it. But I do think though that you know, I mean, look, comic books. I agree with you that the huge corporations own DC and Marvel, so they probably are they probably are maybe less concerned about making money than maybe we give them credit for per se. I mean, I think they I always think sometimes we insult Marvel and DC editorial, and at the same time, I think maybe we don't give them enough credit. I think they're not idiots. They know what's going on behind the scenes. They know the real numbers, and they're still in business. I mean, they might be, maybe comic books are a loss leader. I mean, how often have we always said that? Well, comics are just a loss leader. Well, they still want to make money. Marvel Comics division still makes money. DC Comics division still makes money. I mean, so they are making money now. Then maybe they're making less in some years than in other years, but I know what you're saying. It's I remember some comments made by Rob Layfeld in Robservations in his podcast. He was saying that he remembers a talk he had with Paul Levitz, and this was prior to the New 52 when the New 52 took off. He said Paul Levitz was very, very comfortable being in second place to Marvel, and they relished that spot. There was no expectation. They could do what they want. They had their niche. They had their niche, and they could
Mm-hmm.
they could curate that, and they were only competing with themselves. And if they were second place in sales, okay, fine, they're second place in sales, but they focused on their quality in their universe. And one of the things that the new in Rob Layfeld's opinion, and I actually agree with him on this, at least he convinced me with his argument anyway, that he says once the New 52 began, the one bad thing about it was that once DC corporate got a taste of being number one for those 3 or 4 months, and it actually wasn't a long time that they were number one, contrary to what people seem to remember. Uh, Once they got the taste of being the top dog, they couldn't let go of it, and in a sense they still haven't, and they're trying now to always outdo each other. And I think that mentality is sort of, they've forgotten that, hey, it's about the story, stupid. you know Focus on the story and focus on that. And you know being more positive, I actually do think that what's coming up here, you know as crazy as it is, why it might feel like a mishmash. And some people, right now, a lot of people are getting down on DC. I think that this death of the Justice League has got some potential here. I think it actually makes sense. I think it's kind of rehashing some 5G storylines. I noticed that a lot of these 5G storylines that were rumored, we're getting shades, and we're sort of getting fragments of what was 5G in this. And I think Death of the Justice League, taking taking Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Arrow, Black Canary, Hawkgirl, Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, Arthur Curry off the table. Zatanna comes back. It's going to allow, John Kent, Jace Fox, Yara Flor, probably even Naomi, and other people to come to the to forefront, and we're gonna get that for a while, and we're gonna. It might feel a little bit like an all new, all different kind of Marvel, and everybody puts that down when Marvel tried it. But I I do think that we're, you know, I mean, if I'm looking back at the stories that are happening right now, I do think that people are going to look back on Jeremy Adams' Flash run. It's going to, I think, with a smile on their face. Same with Suicide Squad. I'm looking forward to War for Earth 3. I do think Flashpoint Beyond is going to be something that will be memorable. And don't kid yourself. This Death of Justice League might be Joshua Williamson. I have some faith in here. We got the classic DC Crisis coming along. We got these new legacy heroes coming along. We got some attempt to, we got some attempt to actually, God forbid, actually have some nice prequel comics going to the Flash movie. We're in a state of change here. We're evolving, and this isn't necessarily business as usual. And I do think that DC, as crazy as a as a corporately disorganized as maybe they are now, and maybe even will be more when Discovery comes along. You never know here. I mean, you know, right now things are in a state
Well,
of flux, but at least things are changing. I mean, there is movement here, and if they are failing, hopefully they're failing upward. I mean, maybe they'll learn something. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but in a lot of ways, it feels like they're just throwing everything but the kitchen sink, at this problem. Like let's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And again, I think that's a product of somewhat of a rudderless ship. They don't have a Dan Didio with a strong vision. Because you're right, like a lot of these ideas seem really good, but there's no focus. And how can again, DC, that's the continuity place to go where the stories are all tied in. But yeah, like so how like so we're getting Death of the Justice League. Then we also have the War for Earth 3. And then we saw that in a recent solicit for the latest or an upcoming issue of Batman, Lex Luthor's in the Batman suit. So does Batman die and Lex takes over as Batman? But then the Yara Flor series just got canceled, and we still have um, Justice League Incarnate going on and the Infinite Frontier storyline going on. So, uh, and we have a new Birds of Prey series coming out, and we have Aquaman becoming, and we have Trial of the Amazons. It's like all these little mini events. Like, I would almost prefer if we had like a bigger event that tied these in, so I kind of understood where all these stories go. Like I'm not looking for a giant crossover. I got to spend like $300 to read the whole thing. But DC's known for doing those. You mentioned yourself this upcoming Crisis that we're going to get later this year. When's that going to come? Because all this stuff's about to kick off in like April. So is it going to be in the
Well,
toward the later part of the summer? Because usually it's more like a June launch for some of this stuff. But these storylines aren't going to be done in time. We know Joshua Williams had said there's not going to be a Justice League title for a while. So I mean, if there's anything I'm looking forward to from a classic Crisis point of view, is to have like at least more of a clean slate. And this Death of the Just like it is fun that they're doing it on the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman. I like that, but man, I mean, talk about a cliche. Everybody at this point knows that death in comics means absolutely nothing. And Wonder Woman was just dead. You're killing her again already. I don't know how they got John Stewart to be the Green Lantern that died. How did they get that past Jeffrey Thorne? How has he not quit in protest yet over killing John Stewart?
well, he
I
might
don't
not.
know.
He might not even have a job by the time this comes out. I mean, I don't know if his contract, has his Jeffrey Thorne's contract been renewed past issue 12 or 13 for Green Lantern. I don't even know that. I mean, plus if even if it is, I mean, he's got Joe Mullein, Teen Lantern. He's got. I mean, there's
I
you know there.
know, but John Stewart's his boy. I would think he would quit in protest. I really do.
Yeah, we'll see. I just want to give you a little bit of pushback on your comment, because it seems to me that I mean I would think you'd be happier with the smaller events, because I'm actually happier that we have a smaller event like War for Earth 3. It's like 5 issues long. It isn't 12 issues that's going to take forever and a day. I like that we've got a smaller event, Trial of the Amazons, which is again two bookend issues and some filler issues. Uh,
So
and
I would I,
and
I would I would agree with that if it was. So I mean, if you're having an event that's 5 issues long, but it's happening all in one book,
Yeah.
that's 5 months. That's half a year. To me, that's not a quick. That's not a quick
Well, no,
event.
but I don't think Trial of the Amazons is it's actually gonna. I think every 2 weeks because I think it's only going to be like a month and a half or 2 month a 2 month event. Same with
Right.
War for Earth 3. So I mean uh, I kind of prefer the impression I'm getting is, and this is where I'm not sure I agree with you about like I actually I actually because comic books are expensive. I mean, to have a series of mini events, I kind of like the idea of a series of mini events that are 5 or 6 issues long and that you don't have to invest in the entire line and have one major event with a billion crossovers linked to that one event. In this case, I kind of like the idea, at least in theory. Again, if the stories suck, that's not good, but assuming the stories are good, right? Fingers crossed, knock on wood. But I mean, a nice sort of mini event of Trial of the Amazons, War for Earth 3, you got your Flashpoint Beyond, and then you have the summer event, and even the summer event, I'm getting the impression might be kind of self contained because even going into the summer event, the Act 1, Act 2, and then Act 3, which starts with Death of Justice League, I'm getting the sense that in itself is its own little event and it's not necessarily going to be connected to maybe some of the other mainstream issues. So I think that I'm not, I don't know if this, I don't know. I think maybe this will work. I can't say at this point that this will suck. It might work. And I'm really curious to see how it turns out. This Trial of the Amazons, War for Earth 3. I'm really curious. And, you know, I don't know. I guess I'm hoping to be optimistic. I'm hoping the story is good because I tell you, if the story is good on Trial of the Amazons, even though the bleed in has been wonky, if the story is good on War for Earth 3, uh, and that formula works, and if the summer crisis that's coming up, which begins with Death of the Justice League, if Williamson can nail that, DC might end up ending 2022 much better than they ended 2021.
I'm all for that. I'm 100% for that. I think it's weird if you go into a big classic crisis event with the Justice League dead. That's strange, but hey, we need something different. They've done it before with they've done big crisis events with the biggest heroes before, so why not do it differently? Yeah, I'm all for that, and I'm all the fact that we just found out that Trial of the Amazon kicks off with a murder, like from everything that was hinted at, it was this idea of this trial by combat to find out who's going to be the new guardian of of Doom's doorway. And now all of a sudden, this wrinkle of some murder going in. So yeah, I mean, hopefully it's good. The War for Earth 3, I'm less excited about, but that mostly has to do with my dislike for Amanda Waller. But that's not to say that Suicide Squad hasn't been, amazing.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic. So yeah, I'm excited for that
Well,
as well. But I do sort of the thing that throws the monkey wrench in it for me mostly is the story that Williamson was telling in Infinite Frontier. Well, basically coming from Dark Knight Death Metal into Infinite Frontier and now into Justice League Incarnate, because that seems to be at the heart of this idea that everything counts and everything's a multiverse and everything's an omniverse. I almost feel like, in a way, Scott Snyder, and don't get me wrong, I love Scott. Scott's the man, and he's the best. I love him. I feel like he was a little burnt out at DC, and I know not all of it was his fault because he's gone on record as saying because of all the turmoil at DC in 2020, the expectations and the requirements for his Dark Knight Death Metal series kept changing, and it hurt. Obviously, it hurt the quality of the series, but in a lot of ways, Scott like dropped a grenade and left. Right, this whole idea of the quote he gave when talking about breaking the source wall, and that actually happened in Metal, was he would say, think of the DC universe as a fishbowl containing the entire DC multiverse. And what putting a crack in the source wall did was basically take that fishbowl and dump it into the ocean. Right now, there's an infinite number of multiverses, and you can tell all these stories, and everything counts. And it was a way for DC to try to have its cake and eat it too. But in reality, to make that work is really messy. And in a way, I feel like what all this shuffling around and all these different sort of stories and how nothing seems like it connects anymore is all a product of that. So the question is, can you put that genie back in the bottle? Do they really even want to?
Yeah. No, it's good, and just to carry on that that metaphor there, it's sort of like, you got, if you got this wonderful color of water in the fishbowl, and you dump it into the ocean, and suddenly you got a mixture of all these vibrant colors. But the problem is that if you mix all vibrant colors into one bowl, you just got one color. You don't have
Yeah,
multiple colors anymore. You don't have that variety that people are used to, and we've said it before, and many people have said it, but you know on the one hand, we can say that, well, when everything matters in the DC Omniverse, everything matters. Well, that sounds good, but if everything matters, well, that equals to nothing matters,
yeah.
really.
Nothing has,
And
and then if everything
that's the
matters,
danger.
nothing has any emphasis.
That's right. Now, you know,
Everything's on the same level.
yeah, no, I know. Now, I think if it works, see, here's where I have such a hard time. I know I sound maybe like I'm contradicting myself, or paradoxical or what have you, but as much as I'm sitting here and we're sort of we're sort of like talking about the negative side of this and our worries about the DC universe now, I gotta say that I there's a part of me that really likes I really like the Black Label stuff. I kind of like that we're getting these
Agree.
different stories. I kind of like, out of the blue, we'll get something kind of wacky, like the Harley Quinn and the cartoon comic, and DC's always known for that, and so I kind of like the I like that, and I don't want them to turn away from that. Even Mark Wade coming out with with his own sort of like his world's finest
Yep.
with Batman and Superman, and he's chosen to use the classic Superman and classic Batman, and he's got his own way of approaching it. I kind of like that, and so every now and then I get a sense that I I do think that for the most part, most of DC editorial, dare I say, I think they kind of I think they get it. They get the gist of it in terms of what the if the DC Omniverse is going to work, if everything matters is going to work, it can matter where if I can get into a story and I love that story and it pulls me into that universe, the fact that it's not connected to a larger continuity, I can live with that. I wish they would make it. I think so much of this is editorial. I think what DC needs, Jim Lee needs to step up to the plate. They need a voice. They need a figurehead to say, guys, look, this is our plan. Like when we interviewed Jeremy Adams. I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but Jace was nice enough to partner with him to interview Jeremy Adams, and that'll be coming out on Thursday. And great interview. But it frustrates me when Jeremy Adams doesn't know what the sales are on the Flash, or Jeremy Adams is such a positive and passionate creator. But I got a sense in that interview, I don't know about you, that Jeremy Adams has too many question marks in his head in terms of what his future is at DC, and he shouldn't have those question marks. They should know. You know what I mean? Like I just
Yeah, well, remember he even said that they only want writers to be on a book for about a year and a half. Like what? How if you're like how can you even plan anything like year and a half? Like remember when Dwayne Duffy, fantastic guy,
yeah.
really really talented creator.
But
When he got put on Justice League and he never even got to do any of the stories he wanted to do because the whole time he was on there it was like one event tie-in after another.
yeah.
So year and a half, and then you got 3 issues you're going to cross over with this, and then
Mm,
2 months later you're crossing over with that, and like how can you even tell a story
yeah.
if you're only going to be on something for like a year and a half? Like if somebody has a lot of good ideas,
Mm,
and again that could be another part of what like the fallout from this infinite number of multiverse. Now the scale is too big. There's almost too there's no I don't want to say there's no restrictions because obviously there's editorial restrictions based on the value of the IP, like we're saying. But again, I think I'll go back to what I said before. There's no vision. There's no focus. Like what are you guys building toward?
Well, on the other hand, there's less. If you look at the Flash, it doesn't appear to be a great deal of editorial interference on the Flash. The Flash is not one of the members who gets killed in the Justice League, so Jeremy Adams seems to be able to carry through his Flash story when he wants. Batman, I mean, I get a sense that Williamson on Batman is still gonna, that story is gonna be playing out. Superman on Action Comics and War World, that's playing out. What Williamson is building toward with his Crisis with Justice League Incarnate, it's Justice League Incarnate, the members of that have been dealing with the multiversal crisis leading into the summer event, as opposed to the mainstream DCU characters. So I actually think that in a positive way that there hasn't been. I think on the individual titles, I think there's been minimal editorial interference, other than maybe with the Bat titles regarding Fear State. But for the rest of it, Superman, Becky Cloonan, and Conrad on Wonder Woman have been doing their own thing, notwithstanding Trial of the Amazons leading into that. I think uh, Flash, even Green Lantern, Jeffrey Thorne has been left largely untouched in terms of what he wants to do there. There's been there with DC so far since Future State. I think there's been a large amount of a large amount of creative freedom that
Yeah, I would
has,
agree. I
uh,
agree with that.
you know what I mean? Now, you know, you know, it, mileage can vary. Individuals, we can agree or disagree in terms of how good the stories have been, but that's not. But that's not from anything that has been. There's been nothing impairing the writers from telling the best story that they want to put out, and so that's why I see. Like, I think that the structures that are in place, and right now, I think that what's in place right now isn't a bad thing if it carries forward. It's just a question of, are the stories any good? It still comes down to, are the stories any good? And 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 dare I say something a little controversial here, because you and I have been generally positive, and and when we talk about the creators and everything. But I just want to show a thing for those in the last 2.5 years. I just wanted to do a list of writers that has left DC, and in the that has left DC Comics in the last 2.5 years. Sam Humphries, J. Willow Wilson, Dan Abnett, Scott Lobdell, Benjamin Percy, Justin Jordan, Steve Orlando, Cecil Castelluni, Marguerite Scott, Christopher Priest, Scott Peterson, Adam Glass, Rob Williams, Mike Barr, Frank Thierry, Mark Andreyko, Jeff Barker, Jeff Loveness, Keith Giffen, Heath Corson, Brian Hill, Peter Tomasi, Matt Fraction, Greg Rucka, Jeff Johns, although he's coming back, Scott Snyder, and James Tynion the fourth, although Tynion's coming back with a Sandman project. But you get my point that there's been a huge creative shuffle here, and I think for the most part we've gotten new writers, and I think that they are new, and I think generally they've done a fairly competent to good job. But it is worth pointing out that a lot of talent was sort of cleared off the table to make way for the new. And it's going to be interesting to see if there's going to be a reevaluation of that clearing of the table in the next year or so, and just and looking at the sales in terms of editorially the decisions that AT&T will make, and then or Discovery will make once they come in and do some undoubtedly more corporate reshuffling. It's going to be very interesting to see if they're going to be making the same types of decisions or if they're going to be making different ones.
Yeah, and it's not that I want more editorial interference. I guess what I'm saying is I want, and I don't even want to say editorial oversight, but I would like to see the universe feel like it's a little more connected than it is, because right now it does. Like you were saying, they don't the books don't feel connected at all. So I almost think of it like somebody needs to be in that Kevin Feige role, like Kevin Feige, the way he oversees the entire MCU. And it doesn't mean every movie has to cross over with every other movie, but they're all, and they don't even have the same tone. Some movies are, more serious, and some movies have more humor or whatever. But at least he's the visionary. He's the one that knows where it's all going, so that at certain points they can tie in. That's what I'm talking about, and I think that's what Dan did a really good job of, right? Like sitting the staff down and saying, okay, here's where we are now. Where are we going? okay, we're heading toward a final crisis. We're heading toward, infinite crisis. We're heading toward countdown. Whatever the event is, we're heading toward 1 year later. But right now, it's like, is that Joshua Williamson? Well, because he's just a writer. I know they've given him a lot of power to kind of steer things, and I think you need somebody above that level, right? You need somebody at like more of an executive level. So and I don't know who that person is. Obviously, Jim Lee would be a possible person. I don't feel it really suits his strengths, and I feel like Jim would probably be the same one to say that as well. He's great with the business stuff. He's great with the artistic side of stuff, but I don't really see him as somebody that's a really great writer who like Jeff Johns would obviously be a perfect person. Like I think a lot of us know how much Jeff loves DC, but he's not interested in doing that anymore.
Yeah,
He's moved on. He's got movie and TV stuff. I mean, great. He's coming back with another project, but and we've had this conversation a ton of times
yeah.
about who could we have get in there and be that editor in chief that we said. Now Marie Javins is the editor in chief now, and she's definitely a comic book person, but she's definitely more in the traditional role of a behind the scenes sort of editor in chief, just like Bob Harris was. They keep the trains running on time, right? And we've talked about the difference between Marvel and DC between editor in chief and publisher. Um, but yeah, who's that person that has the vision?
Yeah.
Who's that Dan Didio that's drumming up the excitement for the books and is getting all the creators on the same page and
Well, I,
thinking about where they're headed.
yeah. I who we should have a you know i- actually Kevin Feige is sort of like the Stan Lee of the MCU, but for
Yeah,
the movies, you know. And whatever happened to the notion of having like a Stan Lee, even for Marvel, like who even speaks like even CB Cebulski or whatever
Sapolsky. Yeah, he's
Sabolsky.
he's he's been quiet since early
Yeah,
2020.
they've all
Very
been
quiet.
quiet. It's like I don't know. Are they just are they? It seems corporations now. It's like they're afraid to say anything because they're and maybe it's our fault. Maybe it's the fans. We're too toxic. We take everything they say so goddamn seriously. Maybe we're too damn hard on them. And maybe it is our fault. And but it would be nice to have somebody who is passionate and just like even Jim Lee, like the guy at Comic Cons is so great at Comic Cons. He interacts with fans at Comic Cons so well. He really is great. And yet, as a PR person, he's so silent all the time. And say what you will about Dan Didio, but the guy had a passion and he talked about comics and he wasn't afraid to engage the audience and engage and talk about comics and get in your face. And that was his strong point. And you felt like you had a love for comics when he came into when he talked.
Yeah, but I,
I
I
don't know
think you're I
why.
think you're right. I think somebody in that role, anybody that you would put in that role, they're scared. Anybody who could take that role, they're scared to speak out. I don't want to. You know what? Who's ever Pamela Lyford? I know I've called you the devil in the past. You probably take offense to that. You probably have. I'm probably on your list. Pamela Lyford has a list. Everybody, it's a piece of paper on it. It says Jace. That's it. That's all it says. I'll take that job because you know what? I won't care if Discovery decides to fire me or AT&T decides to fire me. I will bleed for DC Comics.
Yeah,
I will try to steer the ship and do the best I can. Not to give the fans what they want, but what the
yeah,
fans need. But that's that's what we need. You're right. We need somebody that can be the hype man, like Dan used to be. That will get in there and do the work and say, I'm going to do what I think is best for DC Comics and for the DC Comics fans, and I'm not going to worry about my job.
yeah, yeah. And because it's so funny because anyone watching this now or listening now, you know that if you read any interview that any publisher gives of any type in any type of corporate hierarchy in any type area of publishing, the way that we YouTubers will dissect the hell out of a paragraph of what they say. Is it any wonder why they have lawyers draft what they say? I
Yeah.
mean, that's how bad it's gotten because uh, now of course I arrogantly think that I don't do that. Nobody does that. Well, let's face it, we all kind of do that, don't we? So, because we dissect the hell out of everything everybody says, and then we judge the hell out of them. But at the same time, I do think there's something to be said. That's why there's a healthy respect that I have for guys like Didio who weren't afraid to get into the trenches there. And you know, to me, it doesn't whatever happened to the job title where to me, that comes with the job. I mean, interact with fans, not just. I mean, it's not all roses. You got to when you interact with fans, it's the toxic ones too. Every now and then you got to confront, and it's omelets and eggs. You got to get in there and you know uh, you got to deal with the bad and wait for the miracle to happen. And that's it's. I just wish they were more. Like I said, I wish. I just feel like I feel to a certain extent that the 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 corporations, the DC and Marvel, the big two, they've almost given up on us fans. They're almost kind of sick of us, and so they're kind of disregarding us. And so they've taken away our spokesman. I remember it's been solely a death by a thousand cuts. I remember we lost the DC comic message boards with the new 52, and they've slowly pushed away the fan. And they've pushed away the comic fan, and there's a distancing, and now we don't even have somebody that who speaks directly to us. Now we got to wait, and we got to have another person who's given a special name, and will just give generic comments in articles, and it's just I feel that it's I don't know, it doesn't feel the same as it did as short as 5 years ago, and it's the kind of it's a little bit it gets sometimes it's a little bit demoralizing as a comic fan.
No, it's usually demoralizing, and it has everything to do, I think, with fan culture. I mean, you want to talk about dissecting what people say. Remember when, and it wasn't even that DC didn't even release these, right? It was at New York Comic Con in 2019, and Dan put up some slides in a DC panel showing the timelines. Remember, and there was
Yeah.
blurry pictures on like
Yeah.
different
We were
comic
there. I was
websites.
there. I was there with Trevor on
Yeah,
New York Comic Con 2019
yeah,
in
and
October. Yeah.
yeah, and people took pictures of those
Yeah.
blurry ass things, and they
I
put
was
them up
one of
on.
them.
Yeah, but but my point is that other comic sites put them up and then try to dissect them. Oh, they're doing this, they're doing that, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Before we even have a chance, before 5G even really has a chance to get started,
Yeah.
people are already jumping to conclusions and people are already yelling and screaming online.
Yeah.
Oh, they're doing this, they're doing that, blah blah blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the problem is, it comes down to the vocal minority, right? Like there's a very small amount of fans on Twitter. Let's just take Twitter for example. There's a very small amount of comic fans that are on Twitter. I've heard numbers anywhere from 1 to 8 comic fan, 1 to 10 comic fans are actually on Twitter. So there's actually a lot more casual readers than you realize that are on there. Um, but they're not the ones making all the noise. And again, I think these are big corporations, and these properties are worth a lot of money in the film realm and the TV realm. And yeah, at the end of the day, you don't want to piss off your corporate overlords. That's what they're worried about. Worried about losing their jobs. So I get it, but you're right. It does feel like that that pipeline, that person, because at the end of the day, you no matter what, like if you agreed with something DC did or not, you always knew that Dan Didio was passionate about DC Comics, and he in a way you as a fan you could always relate to him on that level. Like he was a fan of DC Comics. He happened to work there, but he was a giant fan of DC Comics. And yeah, we have no one now. We have no one that's you know that level of excitement that's talking up the books. So again, rudderless ship. That's how it feels.
Yeah. And yeah, it's again, at least it we don't even have somebody for the movies. Like at least one thing Marvel has, they have a huge speculation boom. Kevin Feige talks up the movies. When Kevin Feige talks, everybody, some Marvel comic will shoot up in value because he mentions a new character or something. We don't even have that for the DC universe. I mean, we don't even have a spokesperson for the movies. the movies that are making $1 billion. I don't understand. I, s- you know, there, I just don't understand. I mean, there really is something about the corporate businessman are not. How can they not know to a point to get a spokesperson? I mean, good Lord, pay somebody. If you paid, good Lord, pay somebody $30,000 a year American, they'll happily be a spokesperson, or 40,000. I mean, I tell you what, pay me 50,000 American a year to wear a suit and my cap, and I'll go out and give me all the free comics to read. Give me free comics to read, 50 grand a year, and I'll happily be your spokesperson. I mean, but now, if you're a $1 billion company, why not go to a good looking actor, somebody who has actually going to be in a movie, or an up and coming entertainer, or a wannabe host? I mean, the potential here is fantastic. Do that. I mean, nurture your talent, your creative talent, your spokesperson, and everything. I can't believe they're not doing that. I'm stunned. I'm absolutely stunned. They'll do it for Comic Cons and they'll do it once in a blue moon, but they won't do it for comic books. And you can link your comic books to your movies, your TV, your video games. I can't believe this. They can't even keep a guy like Dan Cherry. I mean, I mean, come on, like I, I can't believe it's this difficult, but apparently it
Yeah,
must be.
it's mind-boggling. And what's interesting is you wonder if like DC hasn't even gone like they didn't even do New York Comic Con. They didn't do San Diego Special Edition, and it's like they haven't had to do a convention since Dan left because of the pandemic. So like, what's that going to look like? Is it going to feel half-assed? If they don't have somebody to kind of replace Dan, that's exactly what it's going to
Well,
feel
and the
like.
people that knew how to take advantage of that, are they still working for him? I mean, I know they laid off a whole pile, a third of their editorial, plus who knows how much they actually fired. I don't know. But is there anybody left that actually remembers how it's supposed to be done, or how to like?
They got rid of most of their event staff as well, so that's what I'm saying. I mean, and the last year that they did San Diego Comic Con, they combined it with the Warner Brothers booth. To me, that was a nightmare. I've talked to people that work at DC Comics; they hated it. Also, the fact that they weren't in the comic book area and they were over back in the corner and felt like the redheaded stepchild that wasn't didn't feel welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. So yeah, it's too bad. I would love to do it. They'd have to pay me more than 50. They'd have to pay me at least what I make now. I couldn't take
Yeah.
that big of a pay cut.
Well, I want to pick your brain on something. This Flashpoint Beyond project, with Jeff Johns, Jeremy Adams, and Tim Sheridan
Yep.
they're all sort of like co-writing it. Uh, what do you think about it? Because what do you think about the legacy of Flashpoint? It started off as just an event, a comic book event for DC, and it certainly blossomed with its own cartoon movie, and it's sort of now it seems to have it the Flashpoint timeline in DC. Just for those people who a lot of people don't realize this, but the Flashpoint timeline is not actually its own universe. It was actually an offshoot timeline. Right now in the DC universe, Flashpoint Batman shouldn't exist. He's from a timeline that was in fact wiped out. So why is he still around in Justice League Incarnate? This is one of the central questions. Flashpoint Batman, his timeline was wiped out. Why is he still around? Why was he even around for Tom King to use? This is a central question. Now it appears that Jeff Johns is along with Jeremy Adams and Tim Sheridan, they're bringing the Flashpoint timeline back. So maybe it's going to be there. Somehow it survived to be more than just a timeline that should have died. It should have died, but it's around. So do you think it's a good idea that they're doing this? And what's your general feeling about it?
Well, my general feeling is, and again, I can say this with the benefit of 11, well, 10 and a half years of hindsight,
Yeah,
that at this point, again, the New 52 was wildly successful for DC. It put them number one, and Rocky talked about it already. That might not have been a good thing, but in a way, I almost feel like DC should have just left well enough alone and let Jeff Johns tell the story he wanted to tell. Right, like originally, Flashpoint was just supposed to be a Barry Allen story. either told in the Flash comic, maybe you do, a little bit of a mini event. Dan got wind of it and said, "Oh, let's use this to restart the whole universe, starting over with new number ones." DC either should have done that after Crisis on Infinite Earths way back in the day, like Marv Wolfman wanted to do. Now, I don't necessarily agree that they should have rebranded as Action Comics instead of Detective Comics as DC Comics. They would have been AC Comics. That was probably a bridge too far, but they should have done it then because, as you know, Rocky, they had to then fix the continuity with Zero out, or try to fix the continuity with Zero out, because they had so many things that didn't work because Superman was never Superboy, and then how do you have Legion of Superheroes? And yeah, it was a big mess. So DC finally got their way, or Marv Wolfman, his dream of starting everything over with number one. But man, how different would DC Comics be if they hadn't done that and they just said, let Flashpoint just be its, one and done self-contained story within the Flash books, and that would have been fine. But obviously using it as the linchpin for the new 52, which technically we're still in the new 52 continuity, right? Like we haven't had some big crisis that's reset everything. We've had what I'll say is like some retcons, or with Rebirth and what have you, which
Yeah,
introduced the idea of Dr. Manhattan messing with things, right? That's
yeah,
basically Doomsday Clock and all that. But again, because Jeff Johns has been working on TVs and movies and whatnot,
yeah.
and Gary Frank's not the fastest artist in the world, it took what, like almost 2 years for that whole story to play out. So then that caused scheduling, that lateness caused other issues. But the short answer is, yeah, how is Thomas Wayne still around? How's Flashpoint Batman still around? Well, Doctor Manhattan. That's the short answer. Whether or not they should be doing this, I guess I'll go back to your answer. If the story's good, I guess so. If it helps, if it ties into whatever crisis is coming later on and what Joshua Williamson is doing, then yeah, like is the crisis going to be, is Doctor Manhattan going to be the big bad of the crisis? Is this Flashpoint Beyond going to say, oh look, here's exactly what Doctor Manhattan has done? Is somebody going to be able to sit down with Doctor Manhattan, whether it be Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, or whoever, and go, maybe it'll be John Kent. If Jeffrey Thorne has its way, it'll probably be John Stewart. Whoever it is, to sit down with Dr. Manhattan and say, okay, you know what, dude? Stop. Stop messing with, whatever you've been doing, and put everything back the way it was before you messed with it. Then technically, wouldn't we be rolling everything back to pre-Flashpoint? Could you imagine if we rolled everything back to pre-Flashpoint?
I think death. I think the lead up into death metal had something to do with it, and I think the offshoot of the Flashpoint paradox, the Flashpoint timeline, I think maybe got is going to be mixed in with the dark multiverse, and maybe that's how it was salvaged a little bit. And I think Jeff Johns is going to figure out a way to make it work. Because remember, we got the Flashpoint movie coming out, which is essentially like the Flash movie is essentially the movie version of Flashpoint, really is what with a different Batman in it. And so I think that the corporate powers that be, they want the Flashpoint timeline to actually exist, probably in its own universe, and so that's why. And they said
Yeah,
they're
but
getting.
if you clean it up by the end of the year, that'll be after the Flash movie comes out. So maybe if the Flash movie cleans, if it introduces the Flashpoint, but then there's resolution and it cleans it up,
Yeah.
then why, wouldn't you want to reflect that in the comics? Like I don't know, but I will say about, as far as the dark multiverse, you're right, that has tied in. It comes back to what Snyder did with the Omniverse and whatever, and I don't necessarily think that was the best thing, like I mentioned before, but I'd be happy with the dark multiverse going away as well. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, some of the mashup Batmen were cool, Red Racer and all that kind of thing. But I mean, I could go to the rest of my life without seeing the Batman who laughs and be perfectly fine. I don't really feel like the dark multiverse really adds much to the DC universe, and that's just personal. So
Yeah. Well, I want to. I'd like to. Why don't we wrap things up here? Uh, I'll ask you
yeah,
what.
did we mention all the news? We mentioned there's a new Birds of Prey coming in April. There's a new Birds of Prey
Yeah, yeah.
miniseries.
Who's writing that?
So Shay Grayson. It's going to be drawn by Serge Acuna. Those are both females. I think Shay Grayson. she's a an African American writer. I think, I mean, the name looks familiar. I think she's done maybe some something in some anthologies. Maybe she's done some stuff in Batman Urban Legends. I'm not really sure. But what was most interesting to me about the announcement um, is that who's going to be on the team. So the team's going to be led by Lady Shiva and Katana. So Katana, obviously, that's a familiar name to
Yes.
to Birds of Prey, at least the most recent iteration. But the other two members are going to be Miracle Molly and Ghost, which I
Oh,
thought was pretty interesting.
oh, that's really interesting. Miracle
Yeah,
Molly.
yeah,
I actually, that really intrigues me. I really love that. I love Lady Shiva and Katana being on there. And I got to tell you something. Lady Shiva and Katana. I mean, there's that classic Outsiders cover where Lady Shiva killed Katana at one point. So there's got to. I know there's bad blood between them two. So I'm not sure if there's going to be. You never know what the continuity is going to be. But that's a very very interesting lineup. I'm loving it though. I'm loving it. And Ghost. Is that Ghost as in wasn't that Ghost
I'm not
is
sure. I'm not sure who that
that's
is.
from
I know.
another like Batgirl teamed up with Ghost a few times, but Ghost was from a different publishing company, wasn't it?
I, I mean, there is a Ghost from Dark Horse,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, that's the
but
one.
I that's not who this is. I thought we saw a character named Ghost sometime last year that just
Hmm,
showed up briefly. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
curious, yeah.
Other recent announcements. I already mentioned the whole speculation now that Lex Luthor is going to become Batman, which I really hope he does it because we saw him basically become a de facto Superman in the Dan Jurgens Action Comics run, and now he's going to be Batman because he owns Batman Incorporated or he's funding Batman Incorporated.
Yeah.
The speculation is Batman dies in the death of the Justice League, and so Lex Luthor, with all his money, just steps into the bat. Lex Luthor, no way can hold a candle to Bruce Wayne in terms of like physical fighting ability. Something else we speculated on that I'll mention. We've uh, Rocky and I both really loved the Joker series from James Tynion, and we wondered if somebody would continue it after he was done because DC has said it was going to be an ongoing and continue after Tynion left. Now they're saying no, that's not the case. It's going to end, but it may come back. Like they're calling it the end of season one, so maybe they'll bring it back at a later time. Maybe they're just waiting for the right idea. I really hope if they do bring it back, they'll keep it in the same vein. We've talked about. Tell us a story of somebody whose life has been greatly affected by Joker, like James Gordon has, because it's not a Joker title. So anyway, Joker's coming to an end for now. Um, Batman's coming back in April in Detective Comics, and Detective Comics for the first time in years is going to be back on a monthly schedule. Right, it's been bi-monthly for a long time. It's weekly right now with the Tower miniseries.
Yeah.
So Bruce Wayne will be back in April. It's going to kick off with a three-part Riddler story. Uh, and the other reason I mention it is there's going to be a backup uh, written by Sina Grace that focuses on Gotham Girl and her recent attempts at rehabilitation in Arkham. So Sina Grace is a very good writer when it comes to writing like trauma and emotion. So, and I think Gotham Girl has a lot of potential. So we'll see how that plays out. I mentioned at the top when we first started about some crossover for CW. So there's going to be I think a 3 or 4 part crossover with for the CW. It's going to be called Earth Prime, um, and they're basically going to cross over with a bunch of the CW shows. There's going to be a Batwoman issue. There's going to be a Superman and Lois issue. I don't think they've announced. Oh wait, here it is. 3 through 5 will feature stories with Legends of Tomorrow, Stargirl, and The Flash, and they're all going to be written or co-written by writers from the show. So if you're a fan of the CW shows, this is going to be for a lot of these characters their first appearance of the television versions in a DC comic. So Batwoman, Superman and Lois, Legends of Tomorrow, Stargirl, and The Flash.
And it's an
Uh,
interesting name, Earth Prime.
Earth
Is that supposed
Prime.
to be like
Yep.
Prime TV? Because Earth, that just further, like for longtime readers, that's just going to add more confusion to guys like me. Because
Yep.
Earth Prime was always basically like Earth 33, which is
Yep.
where there were no superheroes on Earth Prime or Earth 33. And now Earth Prime is going to be the CW. Why not just call it Earth CW? I
I,
just I don't know, but I get it. But everything now is geared toward the TV. 99% of the people don't read comics. I get it. So they're going to look at Earth Prime and they're going to start associating Earth Prime with CW. And I think that's, well, I'm biased, but I think that's a dumb idea. But maybe
Yeah, I,
I'm too comic centric. I don't know.
yeah, I agree. Call it something else. And then you mentioned this, and I'll just shed a little more light on it. Yeah, there's going to be a 3-part Flash miniseries called Flash: The Fastest Man Alive, and it's going to be a prequel, and it's going to help set up the events for the Ezra Miller film. And it's going to be written by Kenny Porter, who again name sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if I've read anything by him. And there's going to be art from Ricardo Lopez Ortiz, Juan Ferreira, and Jason Howard. They're each going to do one issue apiece. So, I mean, God, that movie is not coming out till November. You can't give me one artist to do all 3 issues. I don't know. Maybe based on the movie, they're going to be in different on different Earths or different dimensions or different multiverse. So they're going for a different look for each one. But I just find it strange that they're choosing a different artist for each one. But
It's interesting that traditionally, I don't know what your experience is, but or your opinion is, in the past, whenever there's been prequel comic books, whether I remember the prequel comics, the Superman Returns, I didn't find them all that particularly insightful. Rarely was there ever a spoiler or any sort of Easter egg that
yeah,
sort of hinted at to anything in the movie. So my expectations for those that 3 issues is extremely low.
yeah,
Um,
agreed.
but I mean, it's not. I'm not to say it can't be a good story, but the central conceit of a prequel to like a blockbuster, movie should be, well, wouldn't it be nice to have a little bit of an Easter egg or a little bit of hints here and there, hinting at something that might be in the movie? I've never seen that yet. I don't expect to see it now. I've never heard of Kenny Porter. I suspect he's another screenwriter who's trying his hand at writing a comic book,
Let me look.
and hopefully he'll do well. That seems to be the trend nowadays, and well, it'd be interesting to see what he brings to the table.
Well, what I kind of hope is that that's where I've seen his name. So he did a story in the Are You Afraid of Dark Side.
Oh, okay, well,
So he's done some anthology. He's done some anthology work for DC. Um, so what I kind of feel like is that this this series may very well be not for us, but because we understand DC continuity, we understand multiverse, we understand alternate storylines and alternate versions of characters. And I sort of feel like with what the MCU's been doing with the variants and all that kind of thing, which remember when Marvel used to brag about how they didn't have a messy multiverse and now they're leaning into it? It's
yeah,
so funny. It's so funny.
yeah,
These Marvel zombies, this is so great, whatever. I'm like, you guys used to make fun of DC for doing this, and
yeah,
now it's the greatest thing since sliced bread.
yeah.
Anyway, it might be interesting if this prequel comic is an effort to kind of educate people, educate non-comic readers on some of the ideas of the DC multiverse before they go into the movie. Because you're right, like Superman Returns, and there's been X-Men ones and Spider-Man ones before prequels to these movies, and yeah, they're always very generic and don't really add anything. Um, but it would be great if this one is a little different in that there's a little more meat to it, and we got somebody like Ezra Miller or somebody else from the movie to come out and like do some advertising, do some marketing, do some promotion with Ezra Miller holding up those copies saying, "Hey, go read this 3-issue miniseries before you come see my movie." Maybe we can actually get some sales bumps. Maybe we can get some people reading some comics after they go see the Flash movie, because my understanding is this Flash movie, like you were saying, being that it's kind of Flashpoint on the big screen, that's a complicated story. There's a lot of moving parts. And yes, they're going to simplify it for, a 2 hour, 2.5 hour movie, 3 hour movie if it's going to be the same running length as the Batman. Oh my God, I can't believe that thing's going to be 3 hours. But this is going to be a complicated, Flash movie is going to be a complicated movie. So maybe they're trying to educate people beforehand, but it'll all be in vain if nobody knows about this prequel comic. So DC, Warner Brothers, AT&T, whoever, you got to get out there. Again, this would be a perfect job for that non-existent spokesperson
This should
to
be
get out
free.
there.
I'll be blunt. They should give it away free. The digital comic. They should give it away free on all their websites. It should be free everywhere. and
Yeah,
just
I
give
wouldn't.
it
I
away
wouldn't.
free.
At
And,
least
and
at least the first issue.
yeah, and explain, the background of maybe, assuming it's like the Flashpoint comic, which I don't expect it to be exactly, but let's say it was. I mean, just a little bit of background on Cyborg, on Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman, and the relationship between the Amazonians and Atlanteans, and just explaining the Flashpoint world a little bit. And the Martha, how Thomas and Martha Wayne, and Martha became the Joker. Like, I mean, you can give some background that can be additive to the movie, that you don't that's not necessary to enjoy the movie, but might give you that additive feeling that you're familiar with what's going on as you're watching it. And because there's a lot of people that really got into the Snyderverse and just love the Snyderverse who've never read a comic book, and they're so passionate about the Snyderverse. That's one of the things why the Snyderverse stood out. And you know I, I'm getting the sense that this Flash movie might still have some Snyder like feel about it in terms of the way it's filmed and everything else, because
God,
it's
I
the
hope
same.
not.
Well, no, I know, but you know what I mean. Like, it involves a lot of the same actors, right? I mean, Gal Gadot's coming back. I mean, a lot of the Snyderverse characters, Aquaman, Jason Momoa, uh, Michael Keaton's going to be in it, but so is Ben Affleck's Batman. I mean, so a lot of the Snyderverse actors are in it. So it's going to attract the Snyderverse crowd, guaranteed, because there's the same actors that are in it. So hopefully it'll get the best of both worlds. You'll get the Snyderverse crowd because they're going to be attracted because it's the same actors. But if it's filmed differently, and I know exactly what you mean when you say that, because I'm tired of the darkness of the Snyderverse too. Brighten it up. Give me a battle in daylight, for Christ's sake. I mean, I get it. But hopefully we'll get the best of both worlds. So there's a lot of potential here. And to me, tying into your earlier comments, Chase, about how it's okay if comic books are a lost leader. Why not let them be a lost leader? Give away the free digital comics on a prequel into the Flash movie. Why not? If you're gonna take a bath anyway, I mean, do you really you sell 30,000 issues for or 20,000? Forget about it. Write it off. I mean,
Yeah, I mean at the end of the day, you got to think of it like an investment.
yeah,
Like we know that okay, what did I say earlier? Right, Spider-Man: No Way Home, sixth highest grossing movie of all time. Like
yeah,
1.7
unbelievable,
billion dollars it's made or
unbelievable.
something ridiculous, right? Have the Spider-Man comics seen a bump at all from that in the last 2 months?
I don't think so.
Not at
Yeah,
all.
and speaking of which, now let's flip the script. Look at Peacemaker right now. Peacemaker is arguably DC's most successful TV, streaming attempt. And what has DC done? You notice that every single DC comic book has a Peacemaker cover now
Yep.
from
Yep.
series. Why? I don't know about you, but I think this is such a dumbfoundingly stupid thing to do. Why are you putting Peacemaker on a cover of every comic? I mean, how many people are gonna you're gonna piss off customers? They're gonna go buy a
Yeah.
Wonder Woman comic, and if they see Peacemaker on the cover, can you imagine the disappointment that if some kid flipping it open, he sees Wonder Woman in there? I know. Okay, now it'll say Wonder Woman on the cover, but what the hell is Peacemaker doing on the cover? I mean,
Yeah, I agree.
like,
I
I
agree.
don't
Because
understand.
they're
This
going to
is so
read it.
fucking
They're going to
stupid.
read the comic. Yeah, they're going to read the comic thinking Peacemaker's in it, and he's not going to
Like,
show up.
I mean, you're gonna look as a speculator. I mean, sure, as a speculator, I can say, "Oh, I want to get every Peacemaker cover." And don't get me wrong. I'm crazy enough. I just might do it. Okay, but I'm just saying that for what are you actually trying to cater to? I mean, I don't understand these guys in suits. If you want to attract a larger audience to comic books, I don't. I don't know. Some guy sitting there, so Peacemaker's, it's a great TV thing. So let's put him on the cover of every comic book that comes out. Who like is Marie Javins? I mean, the buck stops with her. It, what sense does that make? Like, I'd like to be a fly in the wall and explain that to me. You think that there's enough speculators out there that this is really worth it, catering to the 50,000 speculators out there, and I
Yeah,
don't know.
they're
It
catering.
just
Yeah, they're catering to the crossover crowd, the people that read the comics and watch the TV shows.
That's a
That's who that's
small
for.
crowd, and that's not how
Oh
you're
yeah.
going to grow a base. You grow a comic base. It's just nuts. I don't know.
At least they're putting out a Peacemaker one shot this week.
Yeah, that's and I read. Have you read that yet?
No, haven't read
Yeah,
it yet.
I have. Yeah, I actually didn't mind it. I didn't mind it. It was yeah, it was not bad. It was not bad. Garth Ennis was is a writer. It was yeah, it was a little bit kind of like a kind of a creepy ending, but he definitely has his own version of Peacemaker. That's
Yeah, that's the thing. There's so many different versions. My version's always the one that showed up in Vigilante that was like super insane and super violent, like Punisher on cocaine, which is not the John Cena version,
yeah,
and not and the version that we've got in Suicide Squad from Robbie Thompson right now is sort of seems to be in the middle.
yeah,
He's not quite as violent or insane as the one that showed up in the late '80s in the Vigilante comic, um, but he's certainly not the humorous John Cena version. But I'm fine with the version that we have right now in Robbie Thompson's Suicide Squad. I mean that
yeah,
I don't think enough people talk about how good that Suicide Squad book is. And again, like we had the Suicide Squad movie from James Gunn that everybody loved.
yeah.
Did we see Suicide Squad? Is anybody talking about uh, Robbie Thompson's Suicide Squad? Because I'm not really hearing it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. More people should be talking about it. And for what it's worth, Garth Ennis's Peacemaker in that Black Label series that we're going to be reviewing. That's a fairly humorless Peacemaker. That's not John Cena's. He's a
Just
fairly
like I
humorous
like
one.
it.
Yeah,
Just like
uh,
I like it.
yeah, a little far more serious. And but in any event, I think that any you know ah well, lots to cover for DC. We covered a lot. You know, I'm still. There's always something to read. There's lots to read. There's so much to entertain. Uh, it's funny because I don't know how you feel, but when I sit down to read the DC comics for our DC Weekly Spotlight, there's always at least 6 or 7 DC comics that I definitely want to read. And even this week with 18, I mean, I got a list of them all here, and I look at them, and there was at least 8 that I definitely wanted to read. I don't buy all 18 comics, but there's overall. I mean, uh, I I'm not unhappy with DC. I mean, the fact that I got 8 solid reads in a given week for DC, I think that's pretty damn good. And sometimes I realize how spoiled I am, and that's how come sometimes when I sit back and whenever we have a sort of like a heart to heart like this, where we're kind of like we're giving DC the gears. The truth is, goddamn, some of these I'm being entertained by some of these. I'm loving Action Comics right now. DCV Vampires. I'm loving. I'm loving it. I'm enjoying Detective Comics. I love Peacemaker. Robin 10 I thought's good. Superman 78 with the callback to Christopher Reeve. Great series. I'm loving Human Target. Tom King's Flash 778. Again, Jeremy Adams. There really is a lot to love here in the DC universe, and that I end with that because that is the true spirit, I think, of what they were trying to go for with the DC Omniverse when they said that everything matters, in the sense that there's something in there, that something matters in all this for everyone, and even though it might feel like they're throwing shit at a wall to see what sticks, well, at least some things are sticking. and,
Yeah,
and this, some of it might smell, but even the scent ain't too bad. Their shit doesn't always stink.
yeah. I mean, there I would be reading most of it, even if we didn't get the press copies.
Yeah,
If I had to buy all of them, I'd probably be reading like maybe 9 or 10 titles
yeah,
of that were coming out this week. Um,
yeah,
and if we weren't reviewing them, and I could just read what I wanted to read, I'd probably read about 13 or 14 of them. There's probably only 3 or 4 where I would skip it
yeah,
if I wasn't reading it so that we could review it. So yeah, I mean the vast majority of it's really good, and some of it is really really good. Like yeah, in fact, when I finished reading DC Vampires, I went and looked. I'm like, do we have a preview of the next issue yet? Because I wanted the next issue immediately.
yeah.
Yeah, it was so good. So
All right.
all right,
Well,
well I guess that's gonna do it. You got anything else?
no, I think we talked ourselves out of DC, and then I guess we'll. I encourage everyone to hit the subscribe button. Follow me on Twitter at Metropolis40. Hit the subscribe button here for Comic Boom ! And follow Jace at the Comic Source podcast, where this can be heard. And tune in. I guess it'll be late tomorrow evening or early Tuesday morning for our weekly DC Spotlight.
Yep, and don't forget about Spawn Daily. We finally missed a day. Sorry I didn't have one up for you guys on Saturday, but it's back.
Yeah.
And I promise we'll have them up for you this week.
And
so be sure and check those out. And also check out my interview with Christopher Priest that's up today as well.
yes, for sure. And definitely Jeremy Adams is going to be coming out on Thursday, that interview.
Yep.
I also want to say that I do intend on joining Jace again for the Spawn Daily. I just had my daughter has been diagnosed as a diabetic, and so the last few weeks I've been in the hospital where my wife and I are just learning learning about carbs and the different food groups, and we're trying to get our daughter, and so we're in and out of the hospital, so everything's fine. We're just on a learning curve there, so Jace has been pretty good at understanding that, but I do intend on getting that and putting up Jace's reviews of the Spawn dailies, and I'll be on top of that, so no worries there. So,
all right, sounds good. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
but